too that I think we need to have a discussion about. Again, you've talked about African spirituality. With person, divinity, and nature, Dr. Chukwuniri Kamalu identifies 5 elements that our ancestors identified that make up a human being, and why that is an important discussion that we need to be having when it comes to traditional African spirituality. So when you think of a human being, what makes you you? Well, if you listen to people like the French philosopher Renee Descartes, he said mind and body. When we then look at from traditional African perspectives, you've got this idea that human beings could be made up of more than just mind and body. And they've given names and concepts to what these different entities that make up a human being are. And inspired by this, Professor Naim Akbar wrote a book called The Community of Self. And the idea that you are made up of more than one element. And these elements, we could look at them as spiritual elements, or we could look at them as psychological elements. And again, it shows the sophisticated thought processes behind the way our ancestors thought of what makes up a human being.
Yeah, you know, we definitely will go into that, you know, in depth, because it's basic, and it goes all the way back again to Kemet, but let's just say Nile Valley civilizations, in terms of an understanding of, shall we say, mind, and we're going to have to define mind in 2 different ways. Mind with a big M, capital M-I-N-D, and then mind with a small M-I-N-D. And mind with the small M-I-N-D is what can be considered the psyche, and this is what Western psychology, you know, going back to Freud and Jung and all these people, this is what they were talking about, because they had no understanding of big mind, because big mind is really spirit, or consciousness, shall we say, consciousness that is conscious of itself. So they knew only the psychological factors, and those psychological factors really, you know, have a lot to do with your perceptive ability, your identity as a mind-body complex that you just mentioned. You know, who am I? I am my mind, and I'm this physical self. So and that's where my information comes from, the 5 senses, and nowhere else, because that's all that I identify with. So we have the intelligence, we have the ego, which grasps at everything in terms of sensory input. We have the sensory input through our perceptive apparatus, and that then is mind, and that was considered to be the person in the body. You know, the body was there for the sensory information to come in. The mind is there to deal with the information in whatever way the ego wants, and then the ego decides what to do in terms of activity of the body, and that's the understanding of the human being. You know, of course, an understanding of a human persona, but it's not a full understanding of the human being. You see, but that's a European understanding of the self, and it's purely materialistic, because the body is a materialistic entity that brings material information through the 5 senses, and that's as far as European understanding went. And that gave birth to scientific materialism, and it gave birth to philosophy, and you know, all philosophy means really is playing with different ideas from that psyche or mind. There's nothing original in terms of its creative ability. It can only deal with modification of things that they identify, you know, from nature. And therefore that's what has happened through this whole period of science taking over from religion, going through the Middle Ages and coming forward. So we have a civilization based on scientific materialism, which really has to do with a mind-body complex and has nothing to do with the full person, which is different from the African perspective, which is big mind, which includes spirit. And spirit is big mind. And spirit is what connects us to source, which is divinity. So we are manifestations of divinity. Of course, nowadays, quantum physics is called that the unified field. Well, you can call it God, or you can call it the unified field. You can call it the primeval nu, whatever your word is. You can call it the Akashic field. I mean, different civilizations over time have had different words for it. But quotes, we've all known about it except for the European perspective. They just found it at the birth of quantum physics. Before that, Einstein understood something about energy and matter, but he didn't understand anything about consciousness. He thought the manifestation of consciousness was spooky stuff at a distance, which he couldn't understand. So, one of their most brilliant minds, or one of the most brilliant minds ever within that cage of scientific materialism, could not understand, what consciousness was doing, and that consciousness was primary. Then took all of this other stuff, for that to happen. But this has been part of the understanding of African people, and not just an understanding intellectually, but an experience. You see, it's there as an experience of your spiritual nature and your spiritual self. The understanding, again, God and nature first made us what we are, and then out of our own creative genius, we make ourselves what we want to be. That link, as you're talking about, between, divinity, person, and nature. This is primordial in African understanding, going back again to our earlier civilizations. And all across Africa, you'll find it. And, as you mentioned, you mentioned Mbiti and others, certain Sindima, as well as, Kamalu is his name. Yes.
That's right.
As well as Kamalu, and others have identified this in all of the different nations or entities, shall we say, within Africa, from the Dogon to the Bantu and on and on. So we understand, mind from the perspective of big mind. Now, what big mind is the spirit that manifests itself through the functionality of little mind, if you will. But it's little mind that is not conditioned, because little mind is conditioned, by belief systems, by your rituals and by your educational process in terms of your knowledge base. This is all within little mind. It's facts, but it's not wisdom. And that's why Europe doesn't really have a philosophy. If you look at philosophy, it's a love of wisdom. Well, maybe they love wisdom, but they don't have wisdom, if you know what I'm saying. If they have an intellectual argumentation, that is Socratic and doesn't lead anywhere. Dialectic, discussions about what if, and I believe, and I think, as opposed to what you think and what you believe, and you go around in circles, because you cannot come to a conclusion, because a conclusion means certainty. Certainty can come from experience. I have eaten an apple. I know what an apple tastes like. I'm certain about it because I've had that experience. But if you haven't had experience, you can say, well, what is that? That's an apple, and it's red, and it's sweet, and blah, 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 blah. And you can talk about it infinitely, about its characteristics and its facts. But until you've experienced eating the apple, you can't say that I know what an apple is. And that's the difference, I think, between, the African spirituality and the religiosity of these other religions that have been, shall we say, reshaping the African understanding of self. And you know, and we have to understand the difference between big mind and little mind, because big mind then uses little mind to function with, but it's little mind that is not conditioned, you know, by that knowledge base that is out there, but can use that knowledge base because it has a wider perspective in terms of understanding, and because also it gathers information from beyond the five senses. And this is something that our scholars have not gotten into. But of course, it's happening now a lot here in the West. People are beginning to understand about, you know, clairvoyance and experiences outside the body and all of these things. But all of that is already, you know, within African spirituality. And for example, voodoo, you know, it's a way to influence the psyche or the mind through spirit and vibrations and so on. And you know how much understanding you can get through, you know, non-sensory perception. You can walk into a room and sense the feeling that is going on in the room.
That's very true.
You can meet a person and your spirit can take him, or your spirit says, no, that, you know, that person is not somebody you want to associate with. But we don't identify those things as faculties that we have and maximize those faculties. Some Africans do, and they are the spiritual masters, shall we say, in our tradition. I'm talking too much. Jump in.
All right. Also, can I just jump in one more thing as well,
Please.
sir? I think another thing that needs to be said about traditional African belief systems is their ability to reproduce themselves and put systems and structures in place to raise children, especially the transition from child to adulthood, and the rituals that are in place to turn a child into an adult. The kind of thing that happens between the ages of, say, 10 and 15 in traditional African societies, where the spirituality and the customs would then be used to initiate boys into manhood and girls into womanhood, and how that enables a community to reproduce itself, and the importance, a lot of these things that have been lost in the West, because there isn't, with the exception of the Jewish bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, a lot of Western tradition doesn't really have the kind of boy to manhood, girl to womanhood thing. And the traditional African systems, this is something that I've specifically researched, have very, very detailed programs to turn boys into men and girls into women. Greetings. My name is Robin Walker. I'm also known as the Black History Man. I am perhaps best known for my 2006 book, When We Ruled. Based on this book, I'm launching a new online history course aimed at you, the adults. You could be a parent, you could be a teacher, a mechanic, cleaner, professionals, care workers, security guards, taxi drivers, kitchen workers, entrepreneurs, tech heads, lawyers, all of you. We want people from all over the world to be empowered by our content. We want you to gain mastery over your history and heritage. And you can do this by subscribing to our course. Click on the link to get this powerful, life-changing material.
Yeah, I think that's definitely lacking because, you know, it's quite obvious that there are stages to life. There's baby, there's childhood, you know, there's the teenage, you know, then there's adulthood, and then there's old age, and all of these are transitions. and one has to know how to make these traditions. And you know by learning from people who have made these transitions before, and you certainly know if it's a part of the tradition of your culture. And as you say, we've lost that because it's not a part of Western culture, and it has been taken away from us essentially. And nowadays, you know, old people are considered to be passé because the society is not only based on individualism, but it's based on technology. And the old folks know the most recent technology. The most recent technology is known by the youngest people. You know, they're 5 years old and they can take up the cell phone and do whatever it is. So what do we need grandpa for? Grandpa is useless. You know what I mean? He's a troglodyte. But he has accumulated the wisdom of whatever, 80 years, 70 years, and so on and so forth. So it's a civilization that's defeating itself. It's a technological civilization, an industrial civilization. But as my father said, you know, it's doomed to fail because it has no spiritual essence, it has no values, and it's a total immoral civilization. So it's collapsing as we speak. And you know, and that manifests itself in so many ways, and you know that you don't even want to go there. In terms of, you know, young people, 12, 13, 14, being sexually active and so on and so forth. You know, teenagers, you know, with drug abuse, committing suicides and what have you. And, you know, just to speak to that age group that you're talking about, that don't have any training. At best, they go to school and learn X. But who is responsible for X, what they learn? They learn what society wants them to learn, which is to go to the mall and buy stuff, and you know, and you want to work hard enough to be able to buy as much as you want. And all has been removed. Just my last point here before you take over. You know, all parental control has been removed. You can't discipline your child. If you do, even if your child reports it to the teacher or the police, they'll come and put you in jail. I mean, that's ridiculous. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because when it comes to traditional African belief systems, this is where they have superior value. And it's not value that is ancient. It's not value that is medieval. This is value that is useful now. Because if you were to put a lot of our young urban people through such a system, right now, if you were to do it in London, if you were to do it in Kingston, if you were to do it in Atlanta. As a thank you for visiting our website, we are giving you a free copy of our exclusive 100 Black History Facts, which is in fact a taster of our course content. Make sure you leave your email address and we will send it right to you. We hope it inspires you to dig deeper into your history and heritage. The quality of young men and women that we could produce through such a system, our crime rates would drop, gang activity we could stamp out. Do you see? And these are the enduring values. But if people think that traditional African religion has no value, we're not going to probe it for value, for how these ideas can be used right now to address certain sociological problems right now, the way that they were addressed back in the day. And so I'm saying that these religious and spiritual traditions have current usage.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we have to do is reformat those values and that understanding in terms of contemporary terms, so young people can understand it and be not only attracted to it, but allow themselves to be disciplined by it, because it's the only way. It's the only way out. I think, as you mentioned, you know, we need to go into the identity of the person in depth, and we'll do that next time in terms of the different components of our personality. And what it is, they're different components. They don't stand alone. but they're different components of one unity, one entity, and definitely we'll get into that next time, and we have to move towards how then do we manifest this, as you're saying. I don't want to use the word so much ritual, because ritual to me, has a little bit of a negative meaning, and not just in terms of African ritual, but in terms of any ritual, because ritual very often becomes a substitute for the real thing. The real thing may have started out, and it becomes dogma, and it becomes ritual, and then you don't understand the essence. But what we're talking about is the essence of a spiritual identity, and then how that functions on a material plane on an everyday basis, in terms of education, in terms of religion, in terms of economics, and in terms of politics. I think that kind of thing, has to be made plain, because one derives from the other, and spirit drives mind, and mind drives matter, and that's what we're talking about, to manifest that African person. I think Kwame Nkrumah was looking for that African personality which he was trying to create with his conscientism. I don't think he got there. I think my dad, before him, was talking about the African mind and African spirituality, and I think he was more on target. But it certainly, this is 100 years later, and we need to update whatever in terms of our understanding. So I look forward to that. Last words?
No, thank you, sir. It's been a very, 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 very fruitful discussion.
I've enjoyed it myself. Always with you, Robin. Thanks. Until next.
Big respect, sir. All right, have a good one.